Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Monday, November 24th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives. We spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here, those two words are located in the upper left-hand corner. It will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 21 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again, absolutely free. You can also go to your app store and type in the three words HeartLand Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you do that, before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. And if you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process. And it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. And we hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we'd appreciate you doing so. You can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org. Or you can email Jeanie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a question or a comment from you, a testimony, we'll address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred. So you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. The other alternative is you can join us live most weekdays from 11 a.m. to noon Central Time. You go to zoom.us and tell them you want to join a meeting and enter meeting ID. The number is 853-2357-4173. That's 853-2357-4173. And or you can join through a phone call, and one of the many phone numbers that Zoom provides. If you do that, when you sign in, you'll be muted, and you can use *6 to toggle in and out of that mute position on your phone. And we have plenty of time for conversations. We finished reading Guy Finley's book on Thursday, and we read The Boy, the Mole, the Horse, and the Fox, or The Fox and the Horse, in order of introduction in the story. And we did that on Friday. So we have plenty of time for conversation, reports, updates. I'm still waiting to hear back from Christian Sundberg about when he will be able to or willing to reschedule. And that's for the book A Walk in the Physical, which we've read a couple of times now. The second time we read it because we thought it would lead right into his participating in the Mind Shifters radio with us, and then he got ill. So we will just have to see what we see as the new year unfolds. And he said he would be willing to connect for an hour in the new year. So, what's new with you? What do you have going? I have recently been tapping into a series of talks from Krishnamurti, little snippets. They've decided to get a page dedicated to him on Facebook, so you can follow that if you're interested. Back in the early 80s, I got introduced to his writing and work and was shocked to find out that he was still alive until 1986. So there were 2 or 3 years where I was reading his work and really enlivened by it, really motivated by it. And I would imagine that if I had known he was alive, I would have jumped through every hoop possible to see him talk live, but I didn't even realize it. And then I heard a news story that he'd passed away. So as I mentioned with him, one of the traits about him that really endeared his reading, writing, talks to me was that once he made an observation, he didn't say, but here's a special case where that doesn't hold true, or but you don't want to rage at anybody except these people over here. You can rage at them. Or in this situation, if somebody does this, then it's okay to punish them this way or that way. He never went back on the observation because he would ask himself to stay in the moment in direct observation rather than work from a belief or any kind of dogma, right? Any kind of a rehearsed thought. He understood it doesn't work well. That to live your life in the moment with your eyes open is the best way. To be willing to go deeply into the observation always, and understand that all the thoughts you have about the experiences that you're going through or that you have coming to you, the thoughts you have about them are not the thing. And so Krishnamurti understood very, very deeply that we're creating our own emotions, and we do it with a process of thought. And when we want to believe that our thoughts are right or true, even while we're in an upset state or uncomfortable state, we just lock ourselves into that prison and throw away the key. So, let us know, where would you like to go? Here's an Alan Watts book. He's got a number of them that I've purchased recently, and this one is titled The Wisdom of Insecurity, a message for an age of anxiety, written in 1951. I think I've read this intro before, or some portion of it. There's a long intro to this book that was republished in 2011 by Deepak Chopra. But on the much shorter side, Alan Watts puts his own preface here. He writes, I've always been fascinated by the law of reversed effort. Sometimes I call it the backwards law. It's when you try to stay on the surface of the water, you sink. But when you try to sink, you float. When you hold your breath, you lose it. Which immediately calls to mind an ancient and much neglected saying, whosoever would save his soul shall lose it. This book is an exploration of this law in relation to man's quest for psychological security and to his efforts to find spiritual and intellectual certainty in religion and philosophy. It is written in the conviction that no theme could be more appropriate in a time when human life seems to be so peculiar. Now remember, this is 1951. Peculiarly insecure and uncertain. It maintains that this insecurity is the result of trying to be secure, and that contrariwise, salvation and sanity consist in the most radical recognition that we have no way of saving ourselves. So in a situation where I don't have control over the situation, the most sane thing is to recognize I don't have control. He writes, this begins to sound something like Alice Through the Looking Glass, in which this book is a sort of a philosophical equivalent. For the reader will frequently find himself in a topsy-turvy world in which the normal order of things seems to be completely reversed, and common sense turned inside out and upside down. Those who have read some of my former books, such as Behold the Spirit and The Supreme Identity, you will find things that seem to be total contradictions of much of what I have said before. This, however, is only true for some minor respects. For I've discovered that the essence and the crux of what I was trying to say in those books was very seldom understood. The framework and the context of my thought was often hidden, and my intention here is to approach the same meaning from entirely different premises, and in terms which do not confuse thought, which the multitude of thought is irrelevant associations, which time and tradition have hung importance upon them. Right? We think it's important because we've heard it so many times, because our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles all believed it, so we think it's important, and we hang importance upon them, but they're just thoughts. So Ellen writes, in those books, I was concerned to vindicate certain principles of religion, philosophy, and metaphysics by reinterpreting them. That was, I think, like putting legs on a snake. It was unnecessary and confusing because only doubtful truths need defense. Boy, isn't that the I'm chuckling about putting legs on a snake, right? It's just confusing, unnecessary. And we have read a quote before from Bertrand Russell about how when you're arguing with someone about something you believe is true, the fact that you're arguing about it means you're not as certain as you could be. Why? Because when you're absolutely certain about something, you know 2 + 2 = 4. If you're walking down the street and somebody wants to engage you in a conversation about how that's not true, you don't argue with the person. You might listen and have a little amusement, but when you know something at its core, you don't argue and get animated and agitated because you know what you know. And the more that you get agitated and upset when someone tries to question something that you believe to be true, Bertrand Russell says in that quote, that's the more angry you get, the more likely it is that you've gone beyond what the evidence will demonstrate in reaching the conclusions you've reached. So you don't really know what you think you know. Because when you really know something, you don't argue about it. So he said it was unnecessary to try and explain all these things or reinterpret these things because they're true just as they are. He writes, in this book, however, this book is in the spirit of the Chinese sage Lao Tzu, the master of the law of reversed effort, who declared that those who justify themselves do not convince, and that to know the truth one must get rid of knowledge, and that nothing is more powerful and creative than emptiness. And of course, men shrink away from emptiness. But now think about this. This is Alan Watts saying that Lao Tzu declared that those who justify themselves don't convince, and that to know the truth one must be, as Michael Ryce would say, one must be out of your mind. You've got to be outside the realm of knowledge. Get rid of knowledge. Just be in the moment and experience it. Don't let your mind race off in labels. Certainly don't cling to any judgments your mind might offer up. And in this process, you get more and more present in the moment. And you're open. You're wide open and empty, and you're able to take in the flow of the life force, the creative energy. And to do that from that wide open, empty space, most men shrink from that. Most people shrink from that. So Alan writes, here, then, my aim is to show, backwards fashion, that those essential realities of religion and metaphysics are vindicated in doing without them and manifested in being destroyed. In other words, if you try to push something away, it gets more solid. If you walk away from it and let it be, and you walk in another direction, it has no impact on your life. Hold on to it, and it evaporates. Try to push it away, and it becomes as solid as the Rock of Gibraltar. Alan writes, it is my happy duty to acknowledge that the preparation of this book has been made possible by the generosity of the foundation established by the late Franklin J. Machette of New York, a man who devoted much of his life to the problems of science and metaphysics. 1951, Alan Watts. So Alan writes in this book, The Age of Anxiety. He writes, by all outward appearances, our life is a spark of light between one eternal darkness and another. Nor is the interval between these two nights an unclouded day. For the more we're able to feel pleasure, the more vulnerable we are to pain. And whether in the background or foreground, the pain is always with us because it's always with us, it's either in the foreground or the background. We've been accustomed to make this existence worthwhile. And we make it worthwhile through the belief that there's more than the outward appearance. And that we live for a future beyond the life that is here. Now, from an outward appearance, that doesn't make any sense. If living is to end in pain and incompleteness and nothingness, it seems a cruel and futile experience for beings who are born to reason and hope, create and love. Man, as a being, relying on senses, wants his life to make sense. And he's found it hard to believe that it does so unless there's more to it than what he sees, unless there is an eternal order and an eternal life behind the curtain. Something more than just this momentary, fleeting experience of life and death. Alan writes, I may not perhaps be forgiven for introducing sober matters with a frivolous notion, but the problem of making sense out of this seeming chaos of experience reminds me of my childhood desire to send someone a parcel of water in the mail. The recipient unties the string, releasing the deluge in his lap. But the game would never work, since it is irritatingly impossible to wrap paper and tie up a pound of water. There are kinds of paper which won't disintegrate when wet, but the trouble is to get the water itself into any manageable shape and to tie the string without bursting the bundle. The more one studies attempted solutions to problems in politics and economics, in art, philosophy, and religion, the more one has the impression of extremely gifted people wearing out their ingenuity at the impossible and futile task of trying to get the water of life into neat and permanent packages. Boy, there's a lot of truth in that. It is as worthless to try and make your life make perfect sense as it is to try and get water to sit in the shape of a cube so you can wrap it with your wrapping paper. I think it was Aristotle who was walking down the beach one day, and he saw a man scurrying back and forth between a hole in the sand and the water. And he would run down to the water, and he had a little cup in his hands, scoop up a cup of water out of the ocean, run back up the sand to the hole he had dug, and pour the water in the hole. And he just kept doing this back and forth at a ridiculous pace. Eventually, Aristotle had been watching him for a while. He walks up to him, he says, "Sir, my good sir, what are you doing?" And the man said, "I'm emptying the ocean into this hole." And Aristotle chuckles and tries to explain to the man how ridiculous that is. He's never going to empty the ocean into that little hole. And the man stood back and laughed at him, and he said, "Well, Aristotle, you got a lot of nerve telling me that I'm engaged in an impossible task when you're trying to comprehend the entire cosmos with that little brain inside your head." We're geared up to think that this task, which is completely impossible, is possible. And so we're set, we're guaranteed to lose. It's just like, trying to hurry up and get to the end of a journey that has no beginning and no end, and it's of no distance, and when you finally reach the destination, you realize you never went anywhere. It doesn't make logical sense. Why? Because our logic is built from our past. And the new experiences, the stretch of being able to comprehend what would a fourth, a fifth, and 18th dimension look like. How would we, in our current state as physical beings, be able to experience that at all? Big, big question marks. But if you hold them lightly, they're fun, they're creative, they stimulate ideas. If you hold them tightly, they're a prison, and they create suffering. So Alan Watts goes on and writes, "There are many reasons why this should be particularly evident to a person living today. We know so much about history, about all the packages which have been tied and which have duly come apart. We know so much detail about the problems of life that they resist any easy simplification, and they seem more complex and shapeless than ever. Furthermore, science and industry have so increased both the tempo and the violence of living that our packages seem to come apart faster and faster every day. Now remember, please, this is 1951. He writes, that there is then the feeling that we live in a time of unusual insecurity. In the past 100 years, so many long-established traditions have broken down, traditions of family and social life, of government, of the economic order, and of religious belief, that as years go by, there seem to be fewer and fewer rocks to which we can hold, fewer things that we can regard as absolutely right and true, and fewer things that seem to be fixed for all time. Now, to some, this is a welcome release from the restraints of moral, social, and spiritual dogma. To others, it's dangerous and terrifying breach with reason and it's a breach from reason and sanity, tending to plunge human life into hopeless chaos. To most, perhaps, the immediate sense of release was given as a brief exhilaration, and then soon followed by the deepest anxiety. Because if everything is relative, if life is a torrent without form or goal, in whose flood absolutely nothing except change itself can last, then it seems to be something in which there is no future and therefore no hope. Human beings appear to be happy just so long as they have a future to which they can look forward. Whether it's a, quote, good time, close quotes, tomorrow, or an everlasting life beyond the grave. For various reasons, more and more people find it hard to believe in the latter. On the other hand, the former has the disadvantage that when the good time arrives, it's difficult to enjoy it to the full extent without some promise of more to come. If happiness always depends on something expected in the future, we are chasing a will-o'-the-wisp that ever eludes our grasp, until the future and ourselves vanish into the abyss of death. As a matter of fact, our age is no more insecure than any other. There's been poverty, disease, war, change, and death in every age. In the best of times, what we call security has never been more than temporary and apparent. But it's been possible to make the insecurity of human life supportable by the belief in unchanging things that are beyond the reach of human calamity. In God and in man's immortal soul and in the government of the universe by eternal laws of right and wrong, we can build a sense of security. Alan writes, today such convictions are rare. Even in religious circles, there's no level of society. There must even be a few individuals touched by modern education where there is not some trace of the leavening of doubt. It is simply self-evident that during the past century, the authority of science has taken the place of the authority of religion in the popular imagination, and that skepticism, at least in spiritual things, has become more general than belief. The decay of belief has come about through the honest doubt, the careful and fearless thinking of highly intelligent men and women of science and philosophy. Moved by a zeal and reverence for facts, they've tried to see, understand, and face life as it is without wishful thinking. Now I'm chuckling there because he's writing about this as though the men's writing are the writing which has been done almost exclusively by men is showing us science and showing us philosophy and showing us the truth of how life really works. And I was chuckling because I'd been reading from a woman author recently about how when we talk about science and philosophy, we're talking almost exclusively about the thoughts of men, not integrated with the thoughts of women, not led by the thoughts of women, not even questioned the way we question everything that comes out of a woman's mouth. So that's what my chuckling is about. The idea that even really bright people can only know and work with what they've been taught. And so we're all programmed, in a sense, by our language, by our culture, by our past experiences, by the authorities that we buy into that have come before us. And so all really good deep spiritual teachings bring us back to questioning everything. Every time you think you know something and you think you're knowing it and you're thinking about it, you've lost the point. Now you've stepped a few levels away from the direct connection to the experience of life. So, comments, questions, thoughts, answers. How is this landing for you? And or what's been a challenge for you recently that we might assist you in applying the tools to your challenge? An emotional challenge, mental emotional challenge. This is a holiday week, so we will have a support group tomorrow. We will not have one on Thursday. I should probably say that a couple extra times this week because it's unusual to not have support groups on both Tuesday and Thursday nights. But those happen through Zoom, and all the information you would need to join us is absolutely free, and the information is available at mindshiftersacademy.org website. And in lieu of someone raising a hand or commenting or questioning, I'll return to the book. Alan Watts writes, despite some opinions to the contrary, some people have an opinion to the contrary. I skipped a paragraph or two in here. He writes, for all that we've done, we haven't solved all the problems in life. We've improved some conditions, but people still hold a picture of the universe that seems to leave the individual without ultimate hope. The price of these miracles of science in this world has been the disappearance of the world to come, and one is inclined to ask the old question, well, what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and yet lose his soul? Alan writes, logic, intelligence, and reason are satisfied, but the heart goes hungry, for the heart has learned to feel that we live in the future. Science may slowly and uncertainly give us a better future for a few years, and then for each of us, it will end. It will all end. However long postponed, however long our lives get, they will eventually end. Everything composed must decompose. This is the same wisdom that comes from the Way of Mastery, where it says, everything that begins in time ends in time. Alan Watts writes, despite some people having opinions to the contrary, This is still the general view of science. In literary and religious circles, it's now often supposed that the conflict between science and belief is a thing of the past. There are even some rather wishful scientists who feel that when modern physics abandoned a crude atomistic materialism, the chief reasons for all of this conflict were removed. But this is not the case at all. In most of our great centers of learning, those who make it their business to study the full implications of science and its methods, these people are as far from ever as they ever were from what they understand as a religious point of view. Nuclear physics and relativity have, it's true, done away with the old materialism, but they've now given us a view of the universe in which there's even less room for ideas of an absolute purpose or design. The modern scientist is not so naive as to deny God because he cannot be found with a telescope, or the soul because it's not revealed by the scalpel. But he's merely noted that the idea of God is logically unnecessary. He even doubts that it has any meaning. It does not help him explain anything that he can't explain in other ways, and simpler ways. This kind of a scientist would argue that if everything which happens is said to be under the province and control of a God, this actually amounts to saying nothing. To say that everything is governed and created by God is like saying everything is up, which means nothing at all. The notion does not help us to make any verifiable predictions, and so from the scientific standpoint, it's of no value whatsoever. Scientists may be right in this respect. They may be wrong. It's not our purpose here to argue that point. We need only note that such skepticism has immense influence, and it sets the prevailing wisdom and mood of the age. What science has said in summary is this: we do not, and in all probability cannot, know whether God exists. Nothing that we do know suggests that he does, and all the arguments which claim to prove his existence are found to be without logical meaning. There is nothing, indeed, to prove that there is no God. But the burden of proof rests with those who propose the idea. If the scientist would say, "You believe in God, you must do so on purely emotional grounds, without basis in logic or fact," well, practically speaking, this may amount to atheism. Theoretically, it's simple agnosticism. For it is the essence of scientific honesty that you do not pretend to know what you do not know. And it's the essence of scientific method that you do not employ hypotheses which cannot be tested. The immediate results of this honesty have been deeply unsettling and depressing. For man seems to be unable to live without myth, without the belief that the routine and the drudgery, that the pain and fear of his life have some meaning and goal somewhere in the future. At once, new myths come into being, political and economic myths with extravagant promises of the best futures in the present world. These myths give the individual a certain sense of meaning by making him part of a vast social effort in which he loses something of his own emptiness and loneliness. And yet the very violence of these political religions betrays the anxiety beneath them, because they are just men and women huddling together and shouting to give themselves courage in the dark. So, as I read this, I think, he's trying to lay a case for how there is no God. No, what he's trying to do is just get clear about how silly and reductionistic it is for us to think we're going to come up with words to describe God, or that we're going to come up with words that can contain God or life or the meaning of life that we have. And the essence of this is, I feel him rushing towards an observation like Rilke's, that we must learn to live in the question. We must learn to live without deciding we have to come up with a 15 or 20 word mission statement that encapsulates the purpose of our life. And while having a primary and a secondary purpose can be useful, understanding the limitations of our language and our programming and what Michael Ryce would call the 9-bit mind, the limitations of my conscious logical mind. If we take all of that into consideration, then we breathe and soften when we build the anxiety that is in the title of this book that Alan wants to help us first become aware of and understand how we're creating it, and then release it. But we are not going to find a solution to our anxiety in the thoughts that we create to pin down our hopes or to pin down our decisions, our label of ourselves as a success or failure, that's not where the security is going to come from. That the security is going to come from being in the flow of life, being awake and aware in the moment, and being open to asking about and being open to being shown a little bit more about myself in the moment and a little bit more about what I might do to be a blessing to myself and others. If I'm approaching every interaction I have with the mantra going, what's mine to do here? What's mine to add to this moment that is loving, that is respectful, that is nurturing? In every moment, it's possible for me to be asking those questions. And then, because I'm cultivating this skill of living in the questioning state rather than grabbing for conclusions and trying to create a false and thereby temporary sense of security, living wide open. I love what Joseph Campbell said about a religion. A good definition for religion is a misunderstood myth. And a good definition of a myth is someone else's religion. And in those talks he would give about myth and religion, and I don't know exactly how the words came together, but how much of this I'm taking verbatim from Joseph Campbell, but the idea is that there's a whole way to understand myth that doesn't just talk about some silly, completely fabricated story. There's a way to understand a myth as a way to say something in a story form that's way too complicated, has so many layers of sophistication to it that you can't communicate it with a simple, direct, declarative statement. So if a myth is a way to teach complex, layered levels of depth and understanding about a certain topic, then it's not just a fake story. It's not just a lie. Back at the book by Alan Watts, he writes, the immediate results of honesty have been deeply unsettling and depressing, for man seems to be unable to live without myth. Without the belief, the routine drudgery, the pain and fear of his life would have some meaning somewhere in the future. At once, new myths come into being. They're political and economic, etc., and they promise all these wealth and riches of the future. Once there's a suspicion that a religion is a myth, its power has gone. It may be necessary for man to have a myth, but he cannot self-consciously prescribe one. He can mix a pill for a headache. So we can make up these myths, but we can't demonstrate their effectiveness the way we can feel the effects of a pill, and it takes away the symptoms of a headache. Even the best modern apologists for religion seem to overlook this fact. For most of their forceful arguments, there's some sort of return to orthodoxy, because those are the ones that show the social and moral advantages of a belief in God. But this does not prove that God is a reality. It proves at most that believing in God may be useful. If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. This is a quote from ages past. Perhaps, but if the public has any suspicion that he does not exist, then the invention is in vain. In other words, the idea of God is only powerful if people believe in the idea. Any idea only has the power that the individual people thinking it lend to it. So I'm going to put the book down and invite comments.
Tim?
Yes.
That last thing, I've missed a lot of this because my daughter called. And so you've been on the show, but I haven't been listening to you. But what you just said, somebody asked me once, what would you do if you found out God didn't exist? And I just thought, well, I would just pray to the God beyond the God that doesn't exist. I don't think I can imagine, and I bet that's true for most people, even if it's unconscious, something big out there has a lot to do with the fact that we're living and breathing and we're created on the planet. So, and that's one thought. And the other thought is just that myth, there's something about myth that brings in an entire universe of feeling tones and images, and it's like it isn't just words. There's something about a myth that's got something built into it that's huge, that has an effect on, we can sense a flavor of it. So those are two things. I don't know what to say. They're not exactly questions, but.
Well, I was just going to say that in everything, he's just talking about this specific case of if people begin to question the existence of God, if the doubt creeps in to the belief, then it loses all of its power and relevance. And what I was going to say is that that's true for every thought that we have. We can hold on to it and practice it, and it can become a belief, or we can just observe it floating by and let it go and not attach ourselves to it, identify with it, or get upset if somebody wants to argue against it. So it doesn't matter whether it's, my thought is that science is the truth of life, or that God is the truth of life, or my thought is I'm the world's best therapist, or my thought is I'm a horrible therapist. What matters is how much of my conscious awareness do I pour into that and treat it as though it's real? What's the relationship I create to these thoughts? In other words, if I've been trained to believe that my thoughts and my intellect are just their primary importance, it's my most important tool, and it's the way you're supposed to figure everything out is with logic and in a linear fashion, if that's what I've been programmed to think, and that's what I believe, I try to do that with everything. And as you might imagine, life's going to be very, very frustrating because life doesn't just fit in these nice, neat little boxes. Here was the story that Alan Watts was talking about. He wants to send a pound of water to somebody, and then when they unwrap it, it spills on their lap. The only problem is the water won't sit there in a nice little block or a ball so he can wrap it. Life doesn't just fit into our thought patterns. And that's okay. It's always been okay. The question is, can we as individuals be okay with it, or do we generate upset around it?
Well, all of what you said makes sense on a certain level, but there's something else. The phrase ground of being came to mind, and I don't know what theologian invented that. The ground of being, Heidegger or something. I majored in religion, various religions in college. Any religion we could get a hold of. It was world religions. That was my major, along with music. And it seemed as if below and above and around that, all of that was something that I'm counting on, but I couldn't possibly say what it is. It's just that I've got my feet on it. And maybe I'm making that up too, but something below that I'm not making up. Anyway. Anyway.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, I don't know where to go with that, but you just caused a mental explosion.
The point is we're all making all of this up. And this is like this whole what is the world lesson from A Course in Miracles that Michael Ryce says. Now, this is perhaps the most important lesson from The Course in Miracles because it helps separate out what's the world that I'm creating in my thought, a world of tightness and tension and judgment, and what's the world that I get to play in, that I get to experience, that is rushing at me in this thing we call life. And most of us haven't even been introduced to the possibility to start questioning for ourselves, is it possible for us to know with this tiny little mind and our little bit of experience, is it possible for us to know how life, quote, should, close quotes, unfold?
No, I don't think so.
No, it's not even close. And yet we're all trained to believe we know. We know what's right. We know what's wrong.
You know what's weird, though, Tim? When you get below that, the one thing that doesn't go away, which feels like a thing and like a judgment, but it's the love word with a capital L. That real love wouldn't have a judgment at all. It wouldn't even judge.
That's right. That's what they say about it. That love allows all things, love embraces all things, love trusts all things, and thereby transcends all things. That's from the Way of Mastery over and over again.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about there is you've just put a word out there.
I know.
And then you're not defining it because you can't, because it goes way beyond what words. And you're simply talking about what it doesn't do.
But below that, it's just the level of okayness. Everything is all rightness. It's an all rightness, acceptableness, so there's no upset in it. Not that I get there, but I think it's there. And that's a think. That's a think. I know that's a think. Anyway, I don't know what to do with this from there, but there's something.
Well, it's about stepping back and just admitting, I don't know. I don't know what to do with this. All right, so I'm going to give up the pursuit of the perfect way to say this. I'm just going to sit with the questioning.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. There's
What's
an
the truth of it? Go ahead.
There's an implication here that since we don't know, we're not going to be okay. But it's deeper than that, so we're going to be okay.
Exactly. We've never really known, and all the stuff we make up trying to make ourselves feel safe and secure hasn't worked, but we just keep trying, and it's okay either way. That's the point. You're going to be okay, and what you have control over in this thing is mostly about how much second and third level suffering are you going to bring on yourself as life unfolds.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really get to decide, I'll never have any pain or any discomfort, but you do get to decide how much of your mind energy you're going to pour into thoughts that lead you to suffering about the way life unfolds.
Right. Mm.
And we would just invite you to do less and less every day, a little bit less of your mind energy poured into your own suffering every day.
Oh, yeah.
Just to see if you like the results.
Yep, I like them.
All right. Well, thanks for being here near the end of this discussion and chiming in. It's always appreciated. And we'll be here again tomorrow and Wednesday this week. Probably not on Thursday, and Friday is up in the air, so I will let people know as the week unfolds.
Great.
All right. Please try to remember that we come from love. We're made of the stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. And I've really been able to discover that every single time life didn't go the way I thought it should, it always worked out better than I ever thought it could.